and 4,000 books were targeted for censorship. Yet despite these alarming trends, today is a day of celebration as we grant these high honors in journalism, literature, drama, and music. I want you to know jurors had a wealth of excellent work to review, with more than 1,200 journalism entries and thousands of books, to narrow down to just 3 finalists in each category for the board to select from. As one of the jury chairs said of the complexity of the judging process, it feels like some kind of miracle of civility that everyone finally comes to agreement and gets the job done on time. They did, and the board did. And in a minute, I'll announce the finalists and winners. But first, I want to hand this over to the co-chairs of the board of the Pulitzer Prizes, Neil Brown, president of the Poynter Institute, and Tommy Shelby, professor of philosophy, African and African American Studies at Harvard University. Neil?
Thank you, Marjorie. The Pulitzer Prizes are more than journalism's most esteemed honor. They are a commitment to the highest standards of fairness, honesty, and storytelling for those who pursue facts and reveal uncomfortable truths. But excellence doesn't come easy, and journalism is under threat. On college campuses, in state capitals, and at local school boards, journalists are locked out in order to thwart their independent reporting. At home and abroad, journalists face intimidation and violence by those who believe in repression over free expression. When we bestowed these awards last May, the Pulitzer Board condemned the unlawful detention of Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter imprisoned in Russia. Here we are a year later, and Evan is still a prisoner. This is outrageous, and the Pulitzer Board renews the call to free Evan. Free him now. From Gaza to Ukraine, from small towns to troubled city neighborhoods, courageous journalists aim to tell the stories of those who have too little power, and we seek to shine a light on those who have too much. Today, through the Pulitzer Prizes, we honor all who do this work, and we do so with gratitude. Now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Professor Tommy Shelby.
Thank you, Neil. We are here to recognize not only excellence in journalism, but also to honor distinguished work in 6 book categories and in drama and music. Our mission is to celebrate the finest achievements in arts and letters, to promote independent and critical thought, and to foster freedom of expression. This year, we are thrilled to highlight a wide array of truly exceptional works of creativity and research. With remarkable depth and insight, these finalists and winners explore universal themes in refreshingly new ways. We are astounded by their explorations of the meaning of family and friendship, and their enlightening and sometimes heartbreaking stories about migration, disability, and illness. And we are astonished by their vivid portrayals of love and loss, trauma, and healing. These works also speak candidly about the darker aspects of human life. They confront the immense inequality and poverty that plague our world, how conquest and dispossession shape our relations with one another, the horrors and suffering caused by war, and the rapidly changing climate that portends a perilous future. In awarding these prizes, we highlight exemplary work in journalism, arts, and letters, and in doing so, we hope to encourage others to strive for such excellence. Now, we invite you to learn from, to be inspired by, and to critically reflect on the work we honor today. We now go back to Marjorie Miller, who will announce the finalists and winners.
Thank you, Tommy and Neil. We will begin with journalism. This year, there was remarkable coverage of the Hamas attack on Israel. and 2 wars in Gaza and Ukraine. There were tragic natural disasters in Hawaii and Turkey. The entries included many instances of workplace harm to employees, consumers, and soldiers. Hate crimes and criminal justice, corruption and impunity, and migration remained persistent themes in American life. And globally, we saw stories on the proliferation of undemocratic uses of technology, along with the growing presence of AI in our lives. So without further ado, let's get started. The finalists in breaking news are staff of the Honolulu Civil Beat for its distinctive, sweeping, and urgent coverage of the Maui wildfires that killed more than 100 people and left a historic town in ruins, reporting that held officials to account and chronicled the aftermath and efforts to rebuild. Staff of Lookout Santa Cruz for its detailed and nimble community-focused coverage over a holiday weekend of catastrophic flooding and mudslides that displaced thousands of California residents and destroyed more than 1,000 homes and businesses. Staff of the Los Angeles Times for urgent and thoughtful coverage of a Lunar New Year overnight shooting that left 11 senior citizens dead, demonstrating clear knowledge of and commitment to the local Asian communities. And the prize goes to staff of Lookout Santa Cruz. The investigative finalists are staff of Bloomberg for a deep and rigorous investigation of how the U.S. government aided the global spread of gun violence, prompting the Biden administration to halt most gun exports for 90 days, while it reviewed the federal government's marketing relationship with gun manufacturers. Hannah Dreier of the New York Times for a deeply reported series of stories revealing the stunning reach of migrant child labor across the United States and the corporate and governmental failures that perpetuate it. Casey Ross and Rob Herman of STAT for exposing how United Health Group, the nation's largest health insurer, used an unregulated algorithm to override clinicians' judgments and deny care, highlighting the dangers of AI use in medicine. And the prize goes to Hannah Dreier of the New York Times The finalists for Explanatory are staff of Bloomberg for rigorous, far-reaching reporting that holds corporate water profiteers to account and exposes how they willfully exacerbate the effects of climate change at the expense of less powerful communities. Sarah Stillman of The New Yorker for a searing indictment of our legal system's reliance on the felony murder charge and its disparate consequences, often devastating for communities of color. Staffs of the Texas Tribune, ProPublica, and Frontline for advancing understanding of law enforcement's catastrophic response to the mass shooting at an Uvalde, Texas elementary school, and also for documenting the political and policy shortcomings that have led to similar deadly police failures across the country. The prize goes to Sarah Stillman of The New Yorker. The finalists for local are Sarah Conway of City Bureau and Trina Reynolds Tyler of the Invisible Institute for their investigative series on missing Black girls and women in Chicago that revealed how systemic racism and police department neglect contributed to the crisis. Jerry Mitchell Elisa Daly, Brian Howie, and Nate Rosenfield of Mississippi Today and the New York Times for their detailed examination of corruption and abuse, including the torturing of suspects by Mississippi sheriffs and their officers over 2 decades. Staff of the Village's Daily Sun for its comprehensive investigation and moment-by-moment account of Florida officials in action before, during, and after Hurricane Ian, the deadliest storm to strike the state since 1935. And the prize goes to Sarah Conway of City Bureau and Trina Reynolds Tyler of the Invisible Institute. The finalists for National are Bianca Vazquez-Tones and Sharon Luria of the Associated Press for a deeply reported series on the corrosive effect of the pandemic on public education, highlighting the staggering number of students missing from classrooms across America. Dave Phillips of the New York Times for groundbreaking reporting that uncovered a pattern of traumatic brain injuries among U.S. troops from blast exposures caused by the weapons they were firing. Staff of Reuters for an eye-opening series of accountability stories focused on Elon Musk's automobile and aerospace businesses, stories that displayed remarkable breadth and depth and provoked official probes of his company's practices in Europe and the United States. Staff of the Washington Post for its sobering examination of the AR-15 semi-automatic rifle, which forced readers to reckon with the horrors wrought by the weapon often used for mass shootings in America. There are 2 winners in this category. Staff of Reuters. And the prize also goes to staff of the Washington Post. The finalists for International are staff of the New York Times for its wide-ranging and revelatory coverage of Hamas's lethal attack in southern Israel on October 7th, Israel's intelligence failures, and the Israeli military's sweeping, deadly response in Gaza. Julie Turkowitz and Federico Rios of the New York Times for their immersive and ambitious coverage of migration purgatory in the Darien Gap between Colombia and Panama. Staff of the Washington Post for a sweeping, on-the-ground investigation in India that exposed the methodical undermining of the world's largest democracy by Narendra Modi and his Hindu nationalist allies, who have deployed social media to foment hate and pressure American tech giants to bend to government power. The prize goes to staff of the New York Times The finalists for feature writing: Carrie Blakinger of The Marshall Project, co-published with the New York Times Magazine, for her insightful, humane portrait, reported with great difficulty, of men on death row in Texas who play clandestine games of Dungeons and Dragons, countering their extreme isolation with elaborate fantasy. Katie Engelhart, contributing writer, The New York Times, for her fair-minded portrait of a family's legal and emotional struggles during a matriarch's progressive dementia that sensitively probes the mystery of a person's essential self. Jennifer Senior of The Atlantic, for her beautifully rendered account of her disabled aunt, who was institutionalized as a small child, and the lasting effects on her family, told in the context of present-day care and intervention that make different outcomes possible. And the prize goes to Katie Engelhart, contributing writer, The New York Times, The finalists in commentary are Brian Lyman of the Alabama Reflector for incisive columns that challenge a range of state policies flouting democratic norms and targeting vulnerable populations, written with the commanding authority of a veteran political observer. J. Caspian Kang of The New Yorker for provocative columns that urge us to re-examine popular narratives on such critical topics as affirmative action, racial politics, and the portrayal of gun violence. Vladimir Kara-Murza, contributor, The Washington Post, for passionate columns written at great personal risk from his prison cell, warning of the consequences of dissent in Vladimir Putin's Russia and insisting on a democratic future for his country. And the prize goes to Vladimir Kara-Murza, contributor, The Washington Post. The finalists in criticism: Zadie Smith, contributor, The New York Review of Books, for a review of the film Tar that addressed with wit and ease such consequential themes as mortality and the clash of generations. Vincent Cunningham of The New Yorker for theater reviews that reflect a formidable knowledge of the stage and the mechanics of performance, along with canny observations on the human condition. Justin Chang of the Los Angeles Times for richly evocative and genre-spanning film criticism that reflects on the contemporary movie-going experience. And the prize goes to Justin Chang of the Los Angeles Times. The finalists in editorial writing: Isadora Rangel of the Miami Herald for a scathing series that roots the city's multiple political scandals in a troubled local democracy and champions electoral reforms. Brandon McKinley and Rebecca Space of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette for ambitious investigative editorials that examine a collapse in services for the homeless in Pittsburgh and the city's failure to account for millions of dollars meant to offer relief. David E. Hoffman of the Washington Post for a compelling and well-researched series on new technologies and the tactics authoritarian regimes use to repress dissent in the digital age and how they can be fought. And the prize goes to David E. Hoffman of the Washington Post. The finalists in illustrated reporting: Clay Bennett of the Chattanooga Times Free Press for a portfolio of deceptively gentle, mostly wordless cartoons full of juxtapositions that ably communicate complex, sophisticated messages. Madar de la Cruz, contributor, The New Yorker, for his visually driven story set inside Rikers Island Jail, using bold black and white images that humanize the prisoners and staff through their hunger for books. Angie Wang, contributor, The New Yorker, for a vivid, illustrated journey with her toddler that explains how human language learning can never be supplanted by AI. Claire Healy, Nicole Dunca, and Ren Galeno, contributor of The Washington Post, for masterful and sensitive use of the comic form to reveal the story of a great injustice to a group of Filipinos exhibited at the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, where some of them died. And the prize goes to Madar de la Cruz, contributor, The New Yorker. The finalists in breaking news photography: Adem Altan of Agence France Presse for a heartbreaking image of a man clutching the hand of his deceased daughter a day after a 7.8 magnitude earthquake killed more than 50,000 people in Turkey and Syria. Nicole S. Hester of the Tennessean for a distressing image of a young girl looking out of a school bus in anguish as she is evacuated from the scene of a deadly shooting at the Covenant School in Nashville. Photography staff of Reuters for raw and urgent photographs documenting the October 7th deadly attack in Israel by Hamas and the first weeks of Israel's devastating assault on Gaza. And the prize goes to photography staff of Reuters. The finalists in feature photography: Hannah Reyes Morales, contributor, The New York Times, for a creative series of photographs documenting a youthquake occurring in Africa, where by 2050, the continent will account for 1/4 of the world's population and 1/3 of its young people. Nana Heitman, contributor, The New York Times, for illuminating photographs portraying a generation living under President Vladimir Putin's resurgent nationalism while Russia is at war in Ukraine. Photography staff of the Associated Press for poignant photographs chronicling unprecedented masses of migrants and their arduous journey north from Colombia to the border of the United States. And the prize goes to photography staff of the Associated Press. The finalists in audio: staffs of the Invisible Institute and USG Audio for a powerful series that revisits a Chicago hate crime from the 1990s, a fluid amalgam of memoir, community history, and journalism. Dan Slepian and Preeth Varathan, contributor of NBC News, for their relentless 20-year investigation that resulted in a man wrongfully convicted of murder finally receiving clemency. Lauren Chuljan, Allison McAdam, Jason Moon, Daniel Barrick, and Katie Colinari of New Hampshire Public Radio for their gripping and extensively reported investigation of corruption and sexual abuse within the lucrative recovery industry that sought accountability despite legal pressure. And the prize goes to staffs of the Invisible Institute and USG Audio. The finalists in public service: KFF Health News and Cox Media Group for uncovering millions of cases in which the Social Security Administration overpaid beneficiaries, then demanded immediate repayment, imposing debts on elderly and disabled people who had already spent the funds. ProPublica for the work of Joshua Kaplan, Justin Elliott, Brett Murphy, Alex Mayer-Jeske, and Kirsten Berg. Groundbreaking and ambitious reporting that pierced the thick wall of secrecy surrounding the Supreme Court to reveal how a small group of politically influential billionaires wooed justices with lavish gifts and travel, pushing the court to adopt its first code of conduct. The Washington Post for its sobering examination of the AR-15 semi-automatic rifle, which forced readers to reckon with the horrors wrought by the weapon often used for mass shootings in America. And the prize goes to ProPublica for the work of Joshua Kaplan, Justin Elliott, Brett Murphy, Alex Mayer-Jeske, and Kirsten Berg. Today, we also are awarding 2 special citations. First, the Pulitzer Board awards a special citation for the late writer and critic Greg Tate, whose language, cribbed from literature, academia, popular culture, and hip-hop, was as influential as the content of his ideas. His aesthetic, innovations, and intellectual originality, particularly in his pioneering hip-hop criticism, continue to influence subsequent generations, especially writers and critics of color. Our second special citation goes to the journalist covering Gaza. In recent years, the Pulitzer Board has issued citations honoring journalists covering wars in Ukraine and Afghanistan. This year, the board recognizes the courageous work of journalists and media workers covering the war in Gaza. Under horrific conditions, an extraordinary number of journalists have died in the effort to tell the stories of Palestinians and aid workers in Gaza. This war also has claimed the lives of poets and writers among the casualties. As the Pulitzer Prizes honor categories of journalism, arts, and letters, we mark the loss of invaluable records of the human experience. Now we turn to the winners in arts and letters. Our arts awards illustrate that contemporary creativity is healthy, undiminished, and more diverse than ever, with new young voices joining the conversation. The entries in books, drama, and music address such themes as immigration, ecology, goodness, as well as intolerance in our history and in the present day. The finalists in drama are Here There Are Blueberries by Moises Kaufman and Amanda Gronick, an elegant and harrowing work of documentary theater that examines the provenance of a photo album from Auschwitz and probes the unsolvable mystery of how individuals can insist on normalcy while atrocity lurks outside the frame. Primary Trust by Ebony Booth, a simple and elegantly crafted story of an emotionally damaged man who finds a new job, new friends, and a new sense of worth, illustrating how small acts of kindness can change a person's life and enrich an entire community. Public Obscenities by Shayok Misha Chowdhury, a densely written, deeply felt drama that examines identity, home, queerness, and language through the lens of a Bengali American reuniting with his family in India. And the prize goes to Primary Trust by Ebony Booth. The finalists in history are No Right to an Honest Living, The Struggles of Boston's Black Workers in the Civil War Era by Jacqueline Jones, a breathtakingly original reconstruction of free Black life in Boston that profoundly reshapes our understanding of the city's abolitionist legacy and the challenging reality for its Black residents. Continental Reckoning, The American West in the Age of Expansion by Elliot West, a masterly crafted and comprehensive narrative of how our nation's history unfolded across the American West and how the West, no less than the Civil War, profoundly shaped the rise of modern America. American Anarchy, the epic struggle between immigrant radicals and the U.S. government at the dawn of the 20th century by Michael Wilrich, a riveting and beautifully written story of how anarchists and their lawyers remade American law, with profound implications for modern jurisprudence and prompting serious reflection on the meaning and limits of democracy. And the prize goes to No Right to an Honest Living, The Struggles of Boston's Black Workers in the Civil War Era by Jacqueline Jones. The finalists in biography are Larry McMurtry, A Life by Tracy Daughtry, an insightful literary biography of the celebrated author, written with brio and humor that evokes the Depression-era Texas of his youth and the myth of the American West that he dedicated himself to exposing. King, A Life by Jonathan Eig, a revelatory portrait of Martin Luther King Jr. that draws on new sources to enrich our understanding of each stage of the civil rights leader's life, exploring his strengths and weaknesses, including the self-questioning and depression that accompanied his determination. Master-Slave, Husband-Wife, An Epic Journey from Slavery to Freedom by Ilian Wu. A rich narrative of the Crafts, an enslaved couple who escaped from Georgia in 1848, with light-skinned Ellen disguised as a disabled white gentleman and William as her manservant, exploiting assumptions about race, class, and disability to hide in public on their journey to the North, where they became famous abolitionists while evading bounty hunters.
There are 2 winners in this category.
King, A Life by Jonathan Eig. Also, the prize goes to Master-Slave, Husband-Wife, An Epic Journey from Slavery to Freedom by Ilian Wu. The finalists for Memoir: Liliana's Invincible Summer, A Sister's Search for Justice by Cristina Rivera Garza, a genre-bending account of the author's 20-year-old sister murdered by a former boyfriend that mixes memoir, feminist investigative journalism, and poetic biography, stitched together with a determination born of loss. The Country of the Blind, A Memoir at the End of Sight by Andrew Leland, an emotionally resonant account by an author losing his eyesight from a rare genetic disorder. A memoir that explores the physical and conceptual experience of blindness, that explains honestly how ableism fueled his reticence to accept his diagnosis. The Best Minds, A Story of Friendship, Madness, and the Tragedy of Good Intentions by Jonathan Rosen, an account of the author's brilliant childhood best friend and fellow student who was diagnosed as schizophrenic before fatally stabbing his girlfriend, a tragedy used to explore mental illness and the history of institutionalization. And the prize goes to Liliana's Invincible Summer, A Sister's Search for Justice by Cristina Rivera Garza. The finalists in poetry are To 2040 by Jory Graham, a fluent yet spare volume about grief, loss, and vulnerability through an array of themes including environmental disaster and personal mortality. Information Desk, an Epic by Robin Schiff, poetry that chronicles the oddities, indignities, and wonders of working at a museum, a vivid compendium of musings on the nature of art and its creation. Tripas, Poems by Brandon Somm, a collection that deeply engages with the complexities of the poet's dual Mexican and Chinese heritage, highlighting the dignity of his family's working lives, creating community rather than conflict. And the prize goes to Tripas, Poems by Brandon Somm. The finalists in general nonfiction: Fire Weather, A True Story from a Hotter World by John Valiant, an unsparing account of the rapacious Alberta Sands fire, fueled by an overheated atmosphere, dry forest, and omnipresent petroleum products that consumed the town of Fort McMurray at the heart of Canada's oil industry, which brings the global crisis of carbon emissions and climate change into urgent relief. A Day in the Life of Abd Salama, Anatomy of a Jerusalem Tragedy by Nathan Thrall. A finely reported and intimate account of life under Israeli occupation of the West Bank, told through a portrait of a Palestinian father whose 5-year-old son dies in a fiery school bus crash when Israeli and Palestinian rescue teams are delayed by security regulations. Cobalt Red, How the Blood of the Congo Powers Our Lives by Siddharth Kara. A powerful examination of mining operations in the southeastern Congo that reveals a global system of modern-day slavery and the inhumane, often deadly working conditions for the men, women, and children who extract the rare metal required for smartphones, computers, and electric vehicles. And the prize goes to A Day in the Life of Abd Salama, Anatomy of a Jerusalem Tragedy by Nathan Thrall. The finalists for music: Double Concerto for Esperanza Spalding, Claire Chase, and Large Orchestra by Felipe Lara. A reimagining of the traditional concerto with improvisation, vocalization, and Afro-Brazilian elements that forge compelling, intimate relationships between the orchestra and two soloists. Paper Pianos by Mary Kuyumjian. A socially urgent multimedia work that boldly melds music and audio documentary with first-person stories of refugees, exploring how music serves as solace and inspiration under conditions of displacement. Adagio for Wadada Leo Smith by Taishan Sori. An introspective saxophone concerto with a wide range of textures presented in a slow tempo. A beautiful homage that's quietly intense, treasuring intimacy rather than spectacle. And the prize goes to Adagio for Wadada Leo Smith by Taishan Sori. The finalists for fiction are Night Watch by Jane Ann Phillips, a beautifully rendered novel set in West Virginia's Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in the aftermath of the Civil War, where a severely wounded Union veteran, a 12-year-old girl and her mother, long abused by a Confederate soldier, struggle to heal. Wednesday's Child by Iyun Lee, an affecting volume of thematically and stylistically connected stories that are set around tasks carried out by caretakers of the infirm and mothers struggling to carry on after the death of a child. Work that mixes grief with gentle humor. Same Bed, Different Dreams by Ed Park, an inventive postmodern novel that moves from the brutal Japanese occupation of the Korean Peninsula to a lonely Korean-American boy's passion for the buffalo sabers. Interlinked narratives that jump historical and imaginary time zones with humor, sorrow, and irreverence. And the prize goes to Night Watch by Jane Ann Phillips. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and congratulations to all of the winners. You can find more about the winners and their work on our website, pulitzer.org. There you will also find a link to our Pulitzer on the Road initiative, with interviews and events with previous Pulitzer Prize winners. Once again, congratulations to all of this year's winners.